The balloons were my first indication that something had gone wrong. I had been told we were going to dinner, just the four of us, my parents and my sister Renee and me, at a Thai place on Clement Street that my mother had been mentioning for months. I had not asked for anything. I had not asked for a party, had not asked for a cake, had not asked for the particular ordeal of standing in a doorway while a room full of people I see twice a year yell surprise at me in unison. I am 38 years old. I have not enjoyed surprises since I was 9, and even then it was marginal. The balloons were rose gold. 14 of them, clustered in arches over the entrance to my parents' living room, which had been rearranged to accommodate roughly 30 people who were now all looking at me with the expectant expressions of an audience waiting for a performer to take their cue. I smiled. I said thank you. I hugged my mother, who smelled of the same white linen she has worn since 1994, and I told her it was wonderful, which was a word capacious enough to be true in the technical sense. My father stood behind her with his hands in his pockets and his careful, diplomatic smile, the one that means he knew about this and had reservations he did not voice. He kissed my cheek. I let him. Renee was across the room with a glass of Prosecco, watching me absorb the scene. She is 4 years younger than me and has always held those 4 years as a kind of credential, proof of some advantage I could not name, and she could not explain, but that both of us had understood from childhood to be the organizing principle of our family. She was our mother's daughter in the way I had never quite managed to be. The same gestures, the same social fluency, the same ease in a room full of people performing happiness. I had built a company. Renee had built a reputation for being effortless, which is its own kind of labor, though no one says so. She raised her glass at me from across the room. A small, private toast. I raised mine back. The gift was produced after dinner. We had eaten, catered, Mediterranean, passed trays of things I could not always identify, and the cake had been cut, a lemon one with buttercream roses, and people had taken photographs of me beside it that I would never see because I am not on the platforms where they would be posted. The speeches had been short, which I appreciated. My father said something about being proud of me. My mother talked about my childhood in a way that was more nostalgic than accurate. A colleague of mine named Priya, who I genuinely liked and had not expected to see here, said something warm and specific about the company that made me feel, for one unguarded moment, genuinely seen. Then Renee stood up. She was holding something wrapped in silver paper, about the size of a shoebox with a white bow that had been tied with precision. She smiled the way she smiles when she is enjoying herself in a way she expects others to enjoy too, and she said, "Okay, I need everyone's attention for this one because this gift is very special, very personal." She paused for effect. She had always understood timing. You know, our family has always had its little mysteries, little questions. And I thought, for Nora's 38th, it was finally time we got some answers. She handed me the box. The room had the quality of a held breath. I unwrapped it because there was no alternative, because 30 people were watching and the only power available to me in that moment was to do it without expression. Inside the silver paper was a branded kit, a direct-to-consumer DNA ancestry service, the kind that comes in a white box with cheerful typography and promises of self-discovery. A cotton swab in a sealed tube, an instruction card. There was a gift tag in Renee's handwriting. It read, "For Nora, so you can finally find out whose mistake you actually are. Love always." The room went very quiet in a way that suggested at least half the people present understood, immediately, that something had just happened. I heard my mother make a small sound, not a word, not quite a gasp, something in between, the sound of a person who has seen a car enter an intersection at speed and cannot look away. My father said nothing. Renee was still smiling. The smile of someone who has rehearsed this, who has run the scene in her mind enough times that she has decided it will land as a joke. Edgy, a little dark, the kind of humor that announces intimacy between sisters. The kind that requires the other sister's participation to function, and that becomes something else entirely when that participation is withheld. I looked at the kit in my hands. I looked at the tag. I set the box on the table in front of me with the same care I would use to set down something fragile, which it was not, and I looked at the room. "Thank you, Renee," I said. "That's very thoughtful." I did not say anything else. I did not explain or escalate or give the moment more architecture than it had already been given. I picked up my wine. I turned to Priya and asked her something about the Henderson account, which had nothing to do with anything but which served its purpose, and the room slowly remembered how to breathe. Renee's smile held for a few seconds longer than it should have. Then she sat down. I used the kit 3 weeks later. Not because of her, or not only. I had been thinking about it obliquely, without urgency, for longer than I would have admitted at the party. There is a particular quality to the things Renee says that stays with me in the way that only partially true things do. A stone in the shoe, not debilitating but present. I had heard the phrase "another man's mistake" before, not in those exact words, but in configurations close enough to amount to the same thing. Renee had a talent for this, the suggestion without the accusation, the implication worn like a rhetorical question. I did not look like my father. This was not a secret. I had my mother's height and a bone structure that belonged, as far as anyone could tell, to no one in particular. My coloring was different. My temperament was different. These are the kinds of observations that stay quiet in functional families and get weaponized in others, and ours had always existed somewhere in the space between. I registered the kit on a Sunday evening. I swabbed, I mailed it. I went back to work. My company, a bespoke sourcing and logistics consultancy that I had built from a spare bedroom, and one client 11 years ago into a firm with 14 employees and contracts on 3 continents, did not stop moving because I was waiting for a letter. I had a supplier negotiation in Rotterdam that month, a hearing decision that had been deferred twice, and a proposal for a Sao Paulo partnership that required more of my attention than I was giving it. I gave it the attention. The kit sat in the back of my mind like a browser tab I had opened and not yet read. The results arrived on a Wednesday. I was between calls. I opened the email on my laptop, read through the ancestry breakdown first, which told me nothing I found particularly surprising, and then navigated to the family matching section. I sat with it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called the services support line, because I am methodical by nature, and I do not make consequential decisions based on a single reading of ambiguous data. The representative confirmed what the report showed. She used careful, practiced language. She had clearly made this kind of call before, and she walked me through the percentages and what they meant in terms of shared genetic material, and what they categorically ruled out. My father, the man who had stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and his diplomatic smile, shared approximately 23% of his DNA with me. The representative explained, in her careful language, that this figure was consistent with a first-degree relative. A grandparent, for instance. An aunt or uncle. Not a parent. I thanked her. I ended the call. I looked out the window of my office at the street below, which was doing its ordinary Wednesday things. A delivery van double parked. A woman walking a very small dog, pigeons redistributing themselves along a ledge. And I thought about what I now knew and what it meant, and more specifically, what Renee knew. Because Renee had given me that kit with a specific confidence. The confidence of someone who already understood the punchline. The confidence of someone who had been told something, or had found something, or had known something for long enough that it had become material for a toast. So you can finally find out whose mistake you actually are. She had known. She had known, and she had handed me the instrument of discovery wrapped in silver paper with a bow, in front of 30 people, because she had calculated, incorrectly, as it turned out, that I would never use it. That I would be too proud, or too afraid, or too committed to the family's preferred version of itself to pull the thread. She had miscalculated. I did not call my mother that week, or the week after. I had not spoken to Renee since the party, which was not unusual. We went months without speaking in ordinary times, and I did not manufacture urgency where I felt none. What I felt, primarily, was a strange and clarifying calm. The kind that follows a long period of mild, unexamined tension, the relief of a thing finally named. I hired a lawyer, not for any immediate purpose, but because I am a person who prefers to understand the full perimeter of a situation before I decide how to move within it. The lawyer explained what I had and had not, legally speaking. She explained what questions I could ask, what documentation existed, and what my options were if I chose to exercise them. I listened carefully. I asked the right questions. I paid her invoice promptly, which is how I operate with everyone whose work I value. My father called me on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after the party. My mother had told him apparently that I seemed distant. He asked if I was all right. He used the word sweetheart twice, which he had not used since I was a child, and I understood this as a signal, a barometric drop, a change in pressure. He knew or suspected or had been told that something had shifted. "I'm fine," I told him. "Work is busy, you know how it gets." He said he did. He said he was proud of me. He said it the way he always said it, sincerely, I think, in the particular way a man can be sincere and evasive simultaneously. "Dad," I said after a pause. "Yeah, I used the kit." He said nothing for a long moment. I heard him breathe. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay," I said. We stayed on the line for a few seconds after that, the two of us, in the particular silence of people who have just agreed, without negotiating the terms, to table something enormous for a later conversation that may or may not ever come. Then he said goodnight, and I said goodnight, and I put the phone down on my desk and looked at it for a moment. He had not denied anything. Renee called on a Saturday morning, 8 weeks after the party. I know this because I saw her name on the screen and I let it ring through to voicemail, and then I listened to the message, which was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. She started with light, breezy, an invitation to brunch, a restaurant she liked in the marina. She'd been meaning to call. By the 90-second mark, the register had shifted, something in the cadence, a tightening, and by the end she was saying my name in a way that carried weight she was trying to keep out of her voice and failing. She said, "I heard you talk to Dad. I think we should talk. There's stuff you probably have questions about and I want to be the one too. I just think we should talk, Nora. Okay, call me." I did not call her. Not that day, and not the following week. Not because I was punishing her, exactly, or not only, but because I did not yet know what I wanted to say, and I have always believed that the conversation you have before you know what you want to say is the conversation that costs you the most. I had built a company on the discipline of not speaking before I was ready. I saw no reason to abandon it for the convenience of my sister's anxiety. What I knew was this: my family had organized itself for 38 years around a secret that at least one of them had decided to use against me. The gift, the white box, the cheerful typography, the tag in Renee's handwriting, had not been a joke. It had been a test, a dare. The action of a person who believed she held an advantage so complete that she could afford to wave it in the open because the other person would never be brave enough to pick it up. I had picked it up. I had read it carefully. I had taken it to a professional and confirmed every line. Whatever came next, the conversations, the explanations, the inevitable architecture of a family renegotiating itself around a newly exposed truth, I would enter on my terms, in my time, with the full weight of what I now knew arranged behind me like a hand of cards held close. Renee had given me the test as a joke. I had turned it into information. That Saturday, when her voicemail finished playing, I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a pot of coffee, good coffee. The Ethiopian single origin I ordered every month from a small roaster in Portland. And I took it out to my back garden, where the late morning light was doing quiet and specific things to the lavender along the fence. I sat in the wooden chair I had bought 3 summers ago from a craftsman in Vermont, and I drank my coffee slowly. And I listened to the neighborhood arrange itself around me. A lawnmower 2 houses down, a child's voice, the particular contentment of a Saturday with nowhere to be and nothing to perform. The phone stayed inside. There was nothing urgent. Everything I knew was already known. Everything that needed to happen next would happen in its own time, and I would be ready for it, and I would be standing on ground that was entirely my own. The lavender moved in a small wind. I finished my coffee.